This podcast is sponsored by nobody. Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today, I will be doing a tribute to the late, great, subversive musician Nico. I will be talking to Jennifer Otter Bickerdike. Jennifer wrote a book about Nico and that came out about a year ago, and we're going to be celebrating her life, career, and legacy today on the eve of 4th of July. Yeah, Nico, of course, she played with Velvet Underground on their first album in 1967 that Andy Warhol produced, the classic album with the banana cover. And she also worked with what's his name, Federico Fellini on La Dolce Vita, and she just had an amazing life. And Jennifer, of course, is a rock journalist and author, and we're gonna have a great conversation today. I think she has a book out currently about Britney Spears, and we'll get into all of that today. And it's going to be a great conversation. Jennifer and I have been trying to do this for a few months now, but we're going to make it happen today. So yeah, here is my interview with Jennifer Otter Bickerdike. So, going back in time, before we get into Nico, tell us about your background.
My background is, are you recording this, or is this for the Zealed podcast now?
Yep, I'm all done.
Okay. Okay. So I was born and raised in Santa Cruz, California, which in my woohoo, shout out, which in my humble opinion is the greatest place in the world.
Yep.
And have you spent a lot of time or been to Santa Cruz?
Oh, I'm born and raised in San Mateo, so I spent a lot of time in Santa Cruz my whole life.
Oh, and is it hard being up and ready? I mean, it's not that far, but it makes it a little bit out of reach. Not as out of reach as it is for me, but do you miss it?
I sure do, especially around this time of year in the summer, because I used to go to the free concerts all the time.
Oh, my God. Do you know what I still have not gone to? I still have never gone to see the free movies. Like, the dream is, of course, to see Lost Boys on the beach. Like,
oh.
I might die if I ever get that dream together. Like, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
So, incredible. I was listening to a podcast because I'm about to launch my podcast, actually.
Nice.
And I was listening to a podcast that I'd recorded last year for it, and it's just so weird because I never realized, I remember when they were shooting The Lost Boys in Santa Cruz, and it was like, oh, it's cool, there's a movie shooting in Santa Cruz. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize what impact that would have on, it was kind of like this pebble that was thrown into the, if you would, the puddle of my life. And it's been, made all these kind of, ripple effect, this
mm-hmm.
that's gone on forever. Because I was interviewing Will Sargent from Echo and the Bunnymen.
Yeah.
And Echo and the Bunnymen, of course, did a song on the soundtrack, so... Yeah, I love it. But yeah, so I was born and raised in Santa Cruz. Love it. Greatest place. I started working in the music industry when I was 18 years old. By the time I was 25, I was marketing director for Interscope Geffen A&M. Mm-hmm. I did that for about 7 or 8 years. Left that to go work with Gwen Stefani. Left that to go work at Facebook, and then one of my friends I had grown up with, unfortunately, was murdered in a street crime accident. He was just walking home in San Francisco and got shot and killed, and that kind of changed the trajectory of my life, because I was just anything. I mean, I think it's weird. Death is a really weird one, because I think intellectually anything can happen at any time, but until
mm-hmm.
it really comes home to you, you don't really realize it. And that completely just freaked me out. And I sold everything I own and moved to England, because I'd always wanted to live here. Mm-hmm. And the only way I could get here was to get a PhD. So I moved here, and I chose the school I was going to go to based upon the fact that Malcolm McLaren, who had managed the Sex Pistols, that's how I chose my school. It's the stupidest. People always ask me, why did you go to Goldsmiths? And I'm like, because Malcolm McLaren went there. Isn't that the normal reason to choose a school?
Yeah.
So I went to Goldsmiths, and then I did my PhD on Joy Division, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And you're a big fan, so you'll appreciate this. I think one of the things that was the coolest about moving here I still get really excited, but in the early years especially, was going to places that I had only seen like in movies and TV. Going to Manchester, going to where the Hacienda used to be. Like, are you really into that? Do you go to places that are famous?
I actually wish I did go to a lot of places, but I mean, I go to LA a couple times a year, and that's like the extent. I wish I had more money and more time to go to places.
Where do you go in LA?
Oh, all over the place. I mean, I love going to Pasadena and Burbank and Hollywood and places like that. And just seeing locations and go to events out there and stuff.
I really like. I went to like right after I've been to the Viper Room a lot, like in the '90s and the early 2000s. But of course, right after River Phoenix died, I remember going there, and that was really, really moving. And then going up to the planetarium where Rebel Without a Cause and the James Dean bust is. There's that famous scene where James Dean is in like the knife fight. Mm-hmm. So I mean, that is something that, I mean, I wrote quite a bit about that right after I did my PhD. Mm-hmm. I wrote quite a bit about going to places and how pilgrimage to different places that are associated with pop culture has become a thing. And you really see that. Like, Harry Potter is such a massive deal all around. But when I just moved away from London, but when I was living in London, mm-hmm. King's Cross train station, which is a big part of the Harry Potter narrative, they actually constructed a platform 9 3/4, which is the platform that Harry Potter uses to get to Hogwarts. Oh. And so there's always a line of people taking a picture at a fictitious platform that goes to nowhere, and I just found that so fascinating.
Yeah, that's cool. So, yeah. Were you a musician growing up?
You know what's funny is, like, I never considered myself a musician, but my best friend I grew up with, Tammy Katie, we were friends in elementary and junior high school, and we're still she's kind of like one of my touchstone lifetime friends. She always reminds me that I was a musician, Tommy, because, people in bands, when I say bands, like, band camp, do you remember band camp jokes and stuff? Like, band camp is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this is going to blow your mind. In Santa Cruz, we went to a place called Del Mar Middle School. Now, this is the craziest thing as an adult to wrap your mind around. Okay, check this out. It was 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. Now, that age, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, there was a band. And there was, I kid you not, at the time it seemed huge. Like, everybody cool was in the band. Mm-hmm. So it probably only had about like 150 or 200 kids in it, but that's a lot of kids of that age. And the mad thing is, you'd come in as a 6th grader and you'd be like, okay, what instrument do I want to play? And there was only one teacher, one band leader, and then like a helper. So for all those kids, there was only 2 adults. Mm-hmm. And the way it would work is the 7th and 8th graders would teach the 6th graders.
Huh. That's interesting.
Isn't that so cool? Because I have a really bad memory from doing so many drugs and drinking so much in my rock and roll days. Yeah. So Tammy, however, has a brilliant memory. So last time I was home in Santa Cruz, I'm like, God, I really wish I could start like a nonprofit and have it be like the Del Mar Junior High School Band. I'm like, how did we learn the instruments? And she's like, this older kids, the 7th and 8th graders, would teach the younger kids how to play. Mm-hmm. Oh. Isn't that just insane?
Yeah, I wish it was like that everywhere. Camaraderie like that.
Yeah, so cool. And oh my God, Tom, you'll appreciate this. The songs, child, we played. Now, this is the '80s we're talking about. Okay. Yeah. So, oh Mickey, you're so fun, you blow my money, hey Mickey.
Oh God.
Hey Mickey. And I didn't even tell you what instrument. I played the flute, baby. So this day, so we had like Mickey, we had All Night Long, Lionel Richie, Running with the Night, Lionel
I
Richie.
love it.
Yeah, dude, all these jams. To this day, like Running with the Night, like there's this like one part in Running with the Night, I still hear it, and whenever I hear it, I'll just like holler at Tammy on, like leave her a message and be like I'll just like sing the flute part, like doo, doo, doo. Like she's just like, oh god, you've jumped the shark, Jen. So that I would say I was never in a band, but I was in a band. To answer your question.
Oh, that's so cool. Do you remember the first album you ever bought?
Of course I do. My very first record I ever bought was the Go-Go's Talk Show.
Ah, love it.
Yes. And what happened is I was always really into music, and like one of my first memories is stealing my parents' Doors records and listening to the Doors on like my Fisher-Price record player. Did you have one of those?
Yeah, I sure did.
Was it the orange and like the you know the 70s colors, the orange and like tan together?
I believe it was. Yeah, it was kind of yellowish too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I bought one on eBay a couple years ago when I was living in England. I'm like, this will be such a badass thing to have. I don't know why. And I plug it in, and you forget that, or I forgot that the volts in England are different than they are in America. And like, it started to smoke. My husband's like, what is that? What's burning? I'm like, oh, it's my Fisher-Price record player. But yeah, so the Go-Go's. And oh my God, I got so busted because in my first commercial book, which is called Why Vinyl Matters, I write about how much I love the Go-Go's and I love the Bangles, but I love the Go-Go's a little bit more. And I feel so bad because now like I'm really good buddies with the Bangles and they busted me on it, Tommy.
Oh my God, the Bangles are my favorite band, and I just interviewed Susanna's mother.
Oh, when did you interview Susanna's mother?
Back in January.
Oh, that is so cool. Did she tell you about Sue's book, that Sue's doing a book?
No, I did not know that she's doing a book, but I was so emotional, and it was so nerve-wracking for me because it was the 7-year anniversary of my car accident, and I remember watching the video for Walking Down My Street in the hospital because I had just found out that the Bengals were going to be touring that year, and here I was in the hospital badly injured. I was like, I would love to go see the Bengals, so it was a really emotional day for me.
How did you connect with Sue's mom?
Okay, so when I first started this podcast in 2017, I had made an attempt to get in touch with her, right? And then I interviewed Dan Perry, who directed She Knew What She Wants video.
Okay.
And he is good friends with Tamar Hoffs. And so she actually heard that episode, and she loved it so much, she wanted to do the podcast. And so we connected that way. Yeah.
That is really, really cool.
Yeah.
I could say hand on heart that, and I don't say this about very many people, that Anna is one of the most inspiring, wonderful, sweet, generous, fabulous humans that I have the pleasure to call a friend. And I would not have gotten through this last year of my life without Sue, 100 million%.
Oh, that makes me emotional.
Yeah, there's no reason for her to be friends with me. She has a million friends. She's Susanna Hoffs, but it's been I've had so many doubts about being an artist, about writing, about turning 50, just about I think especially being a woman, getting older. I've never been a man, so I can only say from a female perspective. And having someone, it's weird when and you know this from doing the podcast, it's weird when you're talking to someone that is a celebrity, you forget they're a celebrity. It's the celebrity is kind of this other part to them that you're not dealing with.
Right.
And it's talking to her as a person, but then thinking about, she also has to deal with this whole thing of her being a sex symbol and growing up in front of the world and older in front of the world. And the fact that I can talk to her about all that stuff and she listens to me and gives me advice. And one of the things I admire about her the most is the fact that, you know, she's going to be, I think she's going to be 63, 64 next year. 64, is that right?
Yeah, 64 next year.
64 next year, and like she has a brand new book coming out. She's some other things coming out, which I'm not sure I can talk about, but she's all this great stuff happening. And I think to all of us, you know, I think we're really taught this narrative that after like the age of 30, if you've not done that thing, stop dreaming and just get on with your mundane life. And Susanna has kept on creating and dreaming and making these goals come true, and never stop believing and creating stuff and just being an artist and going for it. And it's been such an amazing revelation that, and to see her in motion doing that, and to be able to talk to someone that's doing that and telling me to go do that, it's been brilliant. I love her to bits.
Yeah, I have podcast guests like that I've gotten to have relationships with that, and they pump me up and they motivate me, and it's such a blessing, you know. As a kid, I never thought it would ever happen, but it is, you know.
It's weird. It's cool. It's really cool. It's weird. I mean, and I have to say the same thing for Vicky. I mean, all of Vicky Peterson from the Bengals, same exact thing. Like, her and Sue are very different personas, but like Vicky is so cool, so just normal, totally. Oh my God, I was losing my mind when I was writing my Britney Spears book last year. Literally last year, between Vicky and Susanna, I was losing my shit. Like, it was like Vicky, Susanna, and Shirley Manson from Garbage. The three of them were just, especially Susanna and Shirley, I was like at the end of my rope. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? Why am I doing this to myself? I mean, like calling them crying, saying the message is crying. I'm just like, what? I feel like they were the only people that could kind of relate to what I was going through. And then I'm like, this is so inappropriate that I'm like talking to these women about this, but there was something there about them that, and them listening to me, I don't know, it was really cool. And I'd lay down the road for either one of those chicks. Like, they're just the coolest motherfuckers ever. Sorry, can I swear on this podcast?
Oh, swear all you fucking want.
But I love that you talked to Susanna's mom. I've heard stories about her and Susanna's dad from Susanna, but I've never actually talked to them or met them. So that's awesome that you got to interview her for your podcast.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yes, and I've been going back and forth for a year with Annette Zelinskis about doing an interview. We'll see, and stuff. She's got stuff going on, but yeah, it's a total blessing, and I get so emotional when I think about it, because when I was growing up, the Bengals were my Fab Four, and like I just adore them.
Oh, you should have. Do you know who? Seriously, like, I'll definitely let them know that if you want any of the rest of them. I know Sue's probably not doing interviews right now because she's doing her book stuff, but right. I'll definitely talk to Debbie. Debbie just got back from Egypt.
Oh, has she finally made peace with Walk Like an Egyptian?
Yeah, I didn't see any pictures, but it was funny because she was over here in England, and it sucked because like I just moved down to Devon, and like she was in London when I was in Devon, and then I came up to London to do some work, and then she came down towards. I'm like, like I'm literally going by you on the freeway probably right now.
Yeah.
But that's another person, like, so talented, so that's a great. I'm really happy to hear you love them, because that's a great band to love, and a great group of girls, great group of people, great musicians, every single one of them.
Well, yeah, we'll talk about that stuff later, but I'm curious.
Okay, sorry.
It's okay. No. I'm loving this, but I'm curious to know. So, you know, you've written about, you know, vinyl records and Kurt Cobain and now Britney Spears, but how did your interest in Nico begin?
My interest in Nico really began. This might be a huge disappointment to you, but because I was obsessed, and I still would love to do this. My obsession with this is kind of waned, I have to say, but I was obsessed with doing a book on yacht rock, as it's become known now. Like, I love like Hall & Oates and Doobie Brothers and Christopher Cross, all that kind of Steely Dan, really well produced, kind of like a Blue-Eyed Soul vibe. I'm a massive fan of all that music.
Pop.
And Yeah, that 70s like AOR Gold vibes.
Mm-hmm.
Really nostalgia music for me, and I really wanted to write a book about that. And I kept on bringing all these. At the time, my then literary agent, I kept bringing all these. We'd done Why Vinyl Matters, and I was trying to think of a subject for another book, and I kept on bringing like all these record covers to her, and I'm like, oh, look how cool this Hall Notes is. How's this? How's that? And she just finally said to me, she's like, you know what? She's like, you should just write about like, you find like some woman to write about. And I'm like, oh, that's so, it's one of the things that I think I really bond with the Bengals about is that the woman thing with them always comes first. Always comes first. And it's so irritating. You don't hear that with men. It's never like, ooh, for a man, you're an amazing rocker, or it's an all-male group. Yeah. And like, I think that's something that's been interesting in writing about women, but the agent's like, you should really write something about women because that's like a niche that's not being filled. So it's kind of a bit of a, do I write about a woman because I'm a woman, or that's so cliche, but then at the same time, do you lean into that as like a marketing thing? It's a weird one. So I'm like, okay, let's just see who's not been written about. And I found like there'd not been much written about Nico, and I couldn't believe it because like all these different, like Rolling Stone and Enemy, they all had her like as one of the most important women in like rock and roll history, but there wasn't much written about her.
Richard Witts.
I didn't. I knew that book had been written, but it was old as well. So I didn't know much about her, and I'm like, she's probably like on the revive. I could just see her like playing at like the Santa Cruz County Fair or something like that. I didn't know anything about her, and so I just started reading the stories about her. I'm like, oh my god, this story is just crazy. And then it turned out like I had a lot of acquaintances, not a lot, I had like 2 or 3 acquaintances that had been pretty good friends with her. So talking to them, I was just like, whoa. And then I read the Richard Witts book, and like nothing in the Richard Witts book matched up to the person that I had heard about from other people. So I'm like, okay, I really wanted to, I'm not saying that his book is wrong or right. I just am like, what I want to do, because I'm a complete PhD research nerd, I wanted to get forensic with it, because I feel like with a lot of biographies, people throw their own opinions into it.
Yeah.
You found that a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of people write biographies just so they could get their, their name out there and stuff, I've interviewed a lot of historians, and I'll tell you, a lot of historians walk away from this podcast offended because I know more than they do, and they get paid to do this,
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know what, here's the thing I always say, because I have every day pretty much someone will email me, which I'm so honored that people do, like about one of my books, or they see me on a documentary or whatever. And the thing is, you know what, I would never say in a million years that I am a expert at anything. I would say I know a lot about a lot of things, but I'm shallow, not deep. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It makes total sense.
And so like someone, like I've had like a lot of Nico fans be like, well, this particular, like I was at this thing, and like you got the set list wrong, or I'm like, cool, like that's awesome. I'm not pissed off at you. Like I think that's great. You know what I mean? Like the more information, because one thing I've learned, Tommy, and like I don't know how old you are. Like I'm 50, and like 39. One thing I learned. What'd you say?
I'm 39.
Oh, you're a child. You're a baby. Baby. So one thing you'll see, you're probably kind of starting to see it, is that your life becomes history. And it's weird because like bands I worked with, like like very early on, like I was very early Nirvana days, for example. Mm-hmm. And so you see like all these stories about Kurt Cobain, like who and what Kurt Cobain was and what that time period in the 90s was like, has been like mythologized in this totally different way than what it actually was, and it trips me out. Like there's things that I was at and people I knew that I'll read about, like events I was at, and I'm like, what? Like that's not how. No, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Or people I know, and I'm like, that's not how it was. And so it was really important with Nico for me. And I mean, to be fair, with my Britney book, that one, I did put my agenda into that a little bit. So, and I did say I was going to do that at the very beginning of the book. But in terms of Nico, that was more a forensic search. The Nico book was, how many facts can I find about Nico in terms of who she was, what she was about. There's all this mythology about her. What can we find out? And that's what was important to me. Not like he said, she said, but how can we have this puzzle? We have all these like possible ideas. Let's now piece together as close of a visual picture of a narrative of who she actually was. And that's what I set out to do.
How did she get cast in La Deutsche Vita?
She said that she got cast in that by going on to the set with some friends, and Fellini saw her and was like, "Oh yeah, come on here." And then he was so taken by her look. And there's all kinds of other things like that she knew what an orgy was, and he didn't. Like it's weird. You never know. Like, is it translation? Is it time? Like, has the narrative changed? The story changed over time, or different languages? I mean, that's something else that really kind of bugs me about people say there's, oh, Nico was slow, she was stupid. She spoke 7 languages. I can barely speak 1.
Yeah.
And a lot of these stories, it's like maybe she got the words slightly wrong, or maybe people just didn't understand what she was saying because she did speak all these languages. Yeah. Have you seen La Dolce? Have you sat? I have to tell you, I've not sat through all of La Dolce Vita. I tried watching the whole thing. And I'm all just the parts of Nico in it I think are just so badass, but I couldn't sit through the whole thing. I know that makes me a horrible person.
Yeah, I need to go back and revisit that movie, but I'll tell you, recently I interviewed Tom Schiller, who used to make short films for Saturday Night Live back in the 70s, and he did a parody with Gilda Radner, La Deutsche Gilda, and I told him about how much I always thought that he really captured her talent on film beautifully, and he appreciated that so much.
Oh, that's great. I love that. Do you know it's a great Nico movie though that nobody's seen? And it got horrible reviews. She was in a movie called Sweet Skin, where she plays a burlesque dancer.
I didn't see that.
And I can try to see if I have it somewhere in the depths of my iCloud drive. But it's like her one and only kind of starring role that she got off the back of La Dolce Vita, and it's funny because it just got panned, like universally panned as being this horrific movie. But it was she plays she plays a woman who goes to, I believe it's France, and tries to make it as a ballerina, and because she won't put out, she gets cut from this like ballet review that she's in, and so the only way to support herself is to be a burlesque dancer. But in this movie, the burlesque dancers are kind of like Dita Von Teese-ish, like they're kind of celebrities around town, but they still are kind of, in certain circles, like in the avant-garde circles, their look is cool, but in the high society, they're not cool. Does that make sense?
Exactly. Yeah.
She starts dating this rich dude who basically, she thinks it's love, she thinks it's it, but he's basically using her to get back at his family. And in the end of it, she has the choice to either marry him so he can, basically he's using her to like piss off his family, and if she marries him, she'll have the money, or she can or she can walk away from everything and just kind of go back to being poor, not working as the burlesque dancer, but just figuring out who she truly is. And she chooses that. So she drops the burlesque dancing and she drops the man. And it's fascinating because there's one narrative you hear all the time about Nico is that she's racist, but in the movie, her only true friend is a African-American guy, which I find really kind of a poignant thing about the film.
Yeah, I was reading about that too, that they said that Nico was racist and anti-Semitic.
I mean, one of the things that I find really hard, we're living in an interesting and challenging time in this way, is that I can't graft on what we know today and what we believe today onto the past. I think that really causes a lot of problems.
Yeah.
What happened in the past may not be right, or what we believe now, but I think we have to be thoughtful about why people may have thought certain things in the past, if that makes any sense. I mean, Nico was born and raised in Nazi Germany.
Right.
And I think she spent the rest of her life trying to escape that mantle.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think as a Nico fan? Like, what's your opinion?
Of whether or not she was racist or anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
I just think that it was just a part of of life back then in Germany. I mean, look at what happened. 6 million Jewish people were killed for no reason.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I think too, what's hard is like the thing that people always pin it on too is the fact that you said to Lou Reed, like, I don't want to sleep with Jews anymore.
Yeah.
And I think the thing is that I think of how many bitchy, like off color comments like me and my friends have made to each other through time. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really tall. Like, oh, no more Amazons. Like, I'm not dating like tall chicks anymore or whatever it is. If if you take anything out of context, it can be offensive. And I'm not saying that that was a nice thing to say, but like everything I've read and everybody I've interviewed from that says that they basically tried to be as catty to each other as possible in that scene. So taking that comment in isolation, I don't think is necessarily the right way to look at that comment and make a wide brush judgment about who and what she believed. I think there were a lot more nuances to what was going on there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Uh, so she had really no desire to be in show business until she met Herbert Tobias, right?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think with her, it's funny because one of the things I've asked a lot of people that knew her were, did she, what was her like agenda? Like what did she want to do? What was the goal there?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the goal, she saw her appearance as something to use to get out of Germany and to get out of the whole Nazi situation that she was in, and that whole uh, if you would, that kind of narrative that she'd been raised in terms of the way to be a perfect little German girl. And I don't think that she was like, yes, I'm hot, or something like that. I think that she just wanted to escape really from what she'd been brought up in. And when she met him, I think that's when she kind of saw, okay, this is how I can use this to get to the next thing. I don't think, and one thing that was really fascinating to me is there were other models around that were very picky about like what assignments they would take. And if you look at all the different pictures that Nico did, mm-hmm. some of them are extremely high fashion, and some are like her with laundry detergent.
Yeah.
Hilarious. I love that. That makes me love her so much because she's like, I'm all about the Benjis. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. What's everyone going to pay is what I'm gonna go for. And especially because people may not know this, they didn't have any money. Like, it was looking at the pictures. Like it was really rough. Like she and her mother had zero money when the war ended. So I think it was the first time she had disposable income of any kind. And that was really the name of the game, was to get the money in, not necessarily to pick the coolest thing. I don't think being cool was ever Nico's thing. I think it was about being bohemian, creating great art. And one thing that really attracted me to her, and one of the great takeaways from her, I think, is this idea that is really an alien concept now, Tommy, is making art for art's sake. Like, she had to do this. It was just something burning inside of her that she wanted to create. And I think that's something that we're definitely not encouraged to do that. Like, it's all about make your brand, your followers, all this crap like that now. I mean, that's just like an alien concept to someone like Nico.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder what she would think about the way the world is going now. With social media and creating your own content and stuff.
I mean, I think she would be mortified, but I think she'd be mortified. I mean, it was funny. I had one of my early readers on the book. I sent it to her, and she lives in San Francisco, mm-hmm. and she was like a third of the way through the book, and she's like, "Oh, it's so good, but it's so sad." Then she was like halfway through, "Oh, it's so good, but it's so sad." Then she was like 3/4. Okay, please tell me it gets better. It has a happy ending. And then she's at the end. She's like, "This book was just it was like just it was unrelentingly sad." Did you find it like that?
Yeah. I mean, I put Nico in the category of like people who have like such a mythic presence in the history of pop culture because they didn't become like super famous or go through the roof, you know. But people like
Mhm.
Doug Henning and oh my God, a lot of people who just were so great at what they did, you know. But I guess you know they got in their own way, and that prevented them from being you know a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah. So okay, so who do you think I should do a book on next? What are your top picks?
God, I don't know. I mean, I think that just about everybody in the entire history of pop culture has had books written about them by now. You know,
I
it's
know.
hard to say. But as far as music, maybe Mark Bolan from T Rex. I don't think there's that many books about him.
Well, do you know that's interesting when you say because I can I tell you an interesting T Rex story or Mark Bolan
Oh,
story.
go ahead.
When I first I told you I was like really into the whole pilgrimage, going to places where people had really kind of turned the space that was associated with some kind of popular culture moment into a shrine. There's a place where Mark Bolan actually unfortunately lost his life, where he crashed the Mini Cooper in Surrey, which is not far away from where I lived for 10 years in a suburb of London. And if you go there, there's the Mark Bolan Rock Shrine. Have you seen this before?
No.
You have to Google it. It is this kind of like a median, like we'd call it in America. Like think about like a kind of like a square, kind of like cement area between two lanes of traffic, kind of vibes, like that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this woman that was a huge Mark Bolan fan, she bought this median of land. I mean, we're talking it's maybe like 10 feet by 10 feet, and it's in this extremely expensive burb of London. And she was a huge Mark Bolan fan. When she heard that Mark Bolan had passed away and crashed, she came to the crash site. She was picking up pieces of glass from the crash site. This is like back years and years ago when he first passed away. And
Mm-hmm.
she said she found locks of his hair like in the crash site. I don't know if this is true or not, but she bought this like median of land and eventually erected a statue on it. And there's no matter what time of year you go, there's always tributes and like flowers and letters and all kinds of crazy stuff. But it's this really interesting history because it's very territorial. Like what Mark Bolan fan, like does she have the right to it because she owns this piece of land? So therefore, is it her? Is she the one that gets to control kind of the memory of him and this space where he passed away because she actually owns this piece of land, or is it open to other fans? And there's been like these horrible fights she's told me about with other fans saying that she cannot control the space of land that she owns because Mark Bolan belongs to everybody, and I find it really fascinating.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody else right now but him. But
I'm gonna leave you with that as an assignment. It doesn't have to be anyone music related either. It can be anyone popular culture related. I had an idea for a book, but my agent said it was too specific. I thought it'd be so brilliant. I'm like, I really wanted to do the oral history of 90210.
oh yeah,
He's like that's too specific. I'm like because I totally in a flash. I'm like, oh my god, Luke Perry is dead, and I got really really sad.
yeah. Oh, that would work. Yeah.
So anyway, sorry, I'm totally taking this way off Nico. You're gonna have to do tons of editing. I'm so sorry. I'm
No,
like
no,
completely
no.
going off.
No. It's okay. It's very because my show is very conversational, you know, and off topic things happen all the time. Um, so let's talk about Velvet Underground and Nico because it's the 55th anniversary, and it's not only one of my favorite albums of all time. I think it's one of the best debut albums of all time. It's so subversive, so haunting, so acid induced. You know, it came out the same time as the Doors' first album, and you know what's funny? I think the Doors' first album is L.A. in 1967 in a nutshell, whereas Velvet Underground and Nico is New York in 1967 in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. It's funny because I cannot. One of the things that really pisses me off is that when the Velvet Underground were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they did not induct Nico. And Nico, to
Mm.
me, is such an inherently important part of that record. Like, I cannot imagine her presence not on that album. It's so important on that Velvet Underground debut. And it's just, and I think it definitely, not only musically, but it definitely creates the aura and the iconography, if you would, of the Velvet Underground that still is with us today. And in terms of, there's a great part in the book where I talk about how the Velvet Underground comes to LA and how it's all hippie, peace, love, and granola kind of vibes in Los Angeles. And here are these like skinny, speeded out, all wearing black New Yorkers. And it's just this huge clash of cultures. And I absolutely love it. I mean, as a native Californian, it seemed to me like growing up that is how everything was in that. I wasn't alive, but hearing my parents talk about it, whatever. So to be researching and reading about, there was this whole other scene going on, I found really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I love, Femme Fatale. I think it's very elegantly haunting with that rolling acoustic guitar riff, and Nico really opens her heart up in that song in a very twisted kind of a way. I love I'll Be Your Mirror. That should have been a massive hit, I think. And All Tomorrow's Parties. I think that's her heroine on the album is All Tomorrow's Parties.
No, absolutely. And there's like, people go back and forth about when she actually started doing drugs. I think it was Victor Bacchus who said that he knows who got her into heroin, but he won't say who it is. And there's been some people, when I was doing the interview, said that heroin was not really around. It was very much a speed culture in the factory.
Yeah.
So I've always been very, very fascinated by the factory and Andy Warhol. I mean, I worship Andy Warhol. That whole scene is just so cool to me. And I wish it's fascinating now, because one of my good friends I grew up with, he just came to visit me in England, and he lives in Brooklyn. He was talking about how just like New York is going through this kind of down spiral in prices, and it's like a ghost town in a lot of places. And all I could think was, ooh, that's what all the factory came out of, was what New York had a moment where artists could actually afford to live there. And I got really excited thinking maybe it's going to be the factory too, because that Andy Warhol time period was so exciting. I mean, we're living in an Andy Warhol world now in a lot of ways.
Absolutely, yeah. Was the Velvet Underground unaccepting of Nico from what you found in your research?
I mean, that's a really good question, because it's funny. I think it's taken me over a year, and I'm still kind of working through it, of anger of the way that Nico was treated, not just by the Velvet Underground, but by the press and men and all kinds of things. Just all the time I spent with her, and then going directly from that into working on Britney Spears was emotionally quite difficult. And at first I was really just like, oh my God, they were so, especially Lou Reed was just so horrible to Nico. But then you have to kind of think of it from their point of view. These are not 50-year-old people. These are like kids in their like early 20s. And they have this woman thrust upon their band. And Andy Warhol was like, if you want equipment and you want a place to play, you have to have this random chick be in your group. That would not go over well with many bands I know. They'd be like, oh, I guess we can do this. And then in her mind, she was just like, sweet, like, I'm being given, I think Andy Warhol kind of sold it to her as, this is like your backing band, like, go to it. So I think there was this massive communication lapse, and I don't know if anyone can really be blamed for it, but I do think that it was not a happy, it was not a happy parting. They were not that thrilled with her.
Yeah. How did she meet Andy Warhol?
She and Andy Warhol first met. One thing about Nico that's fascinating is, how you say, Tommy, to someone, oh yeah, if you're ever in the neighborhood, you should come by.
Yes.
But you don't mean it at all. Like, you don't actually mean it. You're just being nice. It's just like a colloquialism. Nico would actually come to your house and probably mean to stay there for at least a week or two. Yeah. So she she first spotted Andy Warhol and his entourage at a art show that Andy was doing. I believe it was in Europe. And it was like, oh, if you're ever in New York, you should come on by. And she like stores these things away like little chestnuts in her mind. So when she eventually hits New York, she does have a record. She has the record I'm Not Saying, which she, of course, does with Andrew Luke Oldham, the Rolling Stones former manager. So she has this, and she's able to bring it over to the factory with Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones. So she's like double dip cool. She has Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones, and she is going to see Andy. And they're like, ooh, it's the girl from La Dolce Vita. So she has it kind of all going on when she brings this. And of course, one thing that is fascinating talking to people like Danny Fields, who I absolutely love and adore, is who eventually signed Nico the Marble Index album, and of course he also worked with the Velvet Underground. Is just when she'd walk in a room, it's just people would just stop and stare at her because her beauty was just like otherworldly. And that is really what it sounds like happened when she came to the factory. Like Andy Warhol was just like, we have to work with this woman. Like they just wanted to find something to do with her, regardless if it made sense or not.
Did she remain friends with Warhol until his death?
No.
Oh.
You know, I mean, kind of. You know what? I say that. Like I'm just completely brushing her aside. One thing that was really interesting is my very first interview I did. Mm-hmm. I didn't even have a book yet, and he's such a sweet and wonderful man, and I adore him to bits. Vincent Fremont, who was, worked very closely with Andy Warhol. I asked him that same question, and he said to me that she would go and see Andy later on, but he was always asking for money for drugs. And Andy was not about that. So I should say I was a little bit too hasty to say no. I would say things changed. Andy seemed to move on quite quickly. Like, you'd be kind of the it girl, the superstar for that year. And then kind of when your time would run out, you'd move on to the next person. And I don't think that Nico did herself that many favors by, getting into the heroin, doing this and that. And then when she would come around the factory, it usually was asking for money for drugs, which Andy was not into at all. I can tell you this, she was very upset when he passed away. That is for sure. And I think that one thing that she always was appreciative of what he'd done for her. However, one thing I think is important to note is, even up until the year she dies, you still see people asking her, what was it like to work with Lou Reed? What was it like to work with Andy Warhol? It's like, that was 20 years ago. It was 20 years at the point when she passed away that she'd done those things. People seem so fascinated with that, not with her as a solo artist. And I think that was very frustrating for her.
Oh, yeah. Well, that'd be frustrating for anybody in show business.
Yeah, frustrating for anyone in show business, I mean, I think about that a lot with, like, my favorite band is the Smiths. Mm-hmm. And that was like 30 years ago for them now. And how irritating must that be? Like every article you read about Johnny Marr or Morrissey always brings up the Smiths. And it's like, can you imagine, like 30 years ago, you were 9 years old. It'd be like someone asking you, how was elementary school back in San Mateo? Do you remember Billy Boo Boo? And you're just like, please stop bringing that up. Like it has no relevance on my life now at all.
Yeah.
So it is very, you do feel sorry for her. Yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah. What do you think about her solo album, Chelsea Girl?
What do I think about it? Yeah. She hated that record. I love that record. I find Nico's music very difficult to listen to because it's not because it's crap or anything like that. It's beautiful, but because it's just so depressing and dark. And this is from someone whose two favorite bands are the Smiths and the Cure. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's fascinating. I have a friend, Jordan, by the way, who's like the most upbeat person I know, and like he'll send me a text message. Oh, I spent the weekend listening to the Nico catalog, and I'm like, you're still alive? You've not shot yourself yet? Like, what's going on? But Chelsea Girl, I think, is an absolutely beautiful record, and that's a lot of people who I interviewed for the book. That's one of their favorite albums. Peter Hook from Joy Division, New Order. That's one of his favorite books. One of his favorite records. Dave Navarro from Jane's Addiction. That's one of his favorite records. So I think that had a huge impact that Nico probably had no idea, even though she legendarily hated that album.
Yeah, I like her rendition of Jackson Brown's These Days. I think it's very lovely.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, I love Jackson Brown, but I do like her rendition of that a little bit better. Don't tell him I said so, please.
What? Yeah, she kept recording albums, but she never had that commercial success that most people get. Was she okay with that?
It's funny because I think that she was just she was not someone. Mind you, this is a different kind of time period. That kind of goes back to what I was saying about what was her goal. Like, was her goal to be a rock star? Was her goal to be Lou Reed? Like, what was the goal there? And I've never been able to really drill down on that with anyone. I've asked. I've been like, what did she want? Like, what was kind of the end objective? And I think sometimes it's hard for me to hear. Sometimes people say the objective was just to get money for drugs. Like, that's pretty horrible to hear, especially when you feel like you're spending a lot of time with this person when you're writing a biography.
Mm-hmm.
And it was difficult to hear. That's why she's doing all this, is just so she can get money for drugs. Like, that's pretty horrific to think about. I don't know. I think that in a lot of ways she had to, like, get this out of her system. Like, it was an expulsion in a lot of ways of thoughts and feelings. And this is going to sound like a strange comparison, but there's a band called, oh my God, what are they called? I'm totally blanking on them. I just was talking, I want to say they're Icelandic, and they've made up their own language that they sing in. What are they called? You so know this band. It's almost like Nico had her own language. Even though she was singing in English, she was using, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like she was using English and words in a different way than anyone else. The way she put words together in her poetry, in her lyrics, she used it as a different. She was using English as an instrument in a different way than I think other people had before, and that's what makes it so profoundly unique. Sigur Rós, that's the band I'm thinking of. Like, Sigur Rós has basically made up their own language that they sing all their songs in. And Nico didn't make up her own language. She took a language that a lot of the world speaks and is familiar with, but she used it in her own specific and completely different way than anyone had done before or since. And I think that's why those records still stand the test of time, and why we're still talking about her all these years after she's passed away.
Mm-hmm. How so? It took like a year to write the book. Was it easy getting the interviews?
Oh my God, it took me 3 years to write the book. 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, it took me 3 years. That's okay. It took me 3 years to write the book. Some interviews were easy, some were hard. Some things were like kind of my two favorite ones are not speaking German at all and being really intimidated by German archives, since I don't speak German, and having to go to archives and try to use Google Translate on my phone to be like, I'm looking for Nico. Like, that was really difficult, but it was so important to me to get as much information as I could. And the other thing is, I had an amazing research assistant, and there's documents like in French that he was using Google Translate on. So there was no stone too random for us to turn to get that information. And what you really found is, like, one of my favorite things was like going up to Manchester, where Nico lived for several years, going up there and being in a cab and just talking to the cab driver. And it turns out he used to drive Nico around Manchester. So just like interviewing a random cabbie suddenly, or talking to a random cabbie, suddenly turns into this really cool interview. And him taking me to like where her manager used to go, and like where he would go with her to buy drugs. It was just insane. So some of those, like, you just go down, you go down a rabbit hole with, when you're on YouTube or something like that. I definitely went into this whole world of Nico that I didn't know existed. Total wormhole.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you talk to Iggy Pop?
Oh my God, I love Iggy Pop. That was one of my favorite interviews. I say this about all my interviews, but that one was really great because he again falls in that kind of Susanna Hoffs territory in terms of someone so iconic, so amazing, and just, I think, strangely, I think he's one of the few people that really understood Nico and saw her as a full person, saw her, the different sides of her, and I think with time and being able to reflect on that relationship, he's come to understand her better, and that was one of the most profound, I think, people I talked to about her for the book, and I'm so thankful to him for taking the time to speak to me.
Yeah, didn't he have like a one night stand with her?
No, she actually came to like live with him in the Stooge house in Michigan. Like they were together for, I think, at least a month. It could have been up to 3 months. Like time's kind of a movable feast in that time period in Iggy and Nico's life, so we're not quite sure. But they were together for a sizable being more than one night period of time.
Yeah, because I remember he was on WTF with Mark Maron years ago, and he talked about the whole encounters with Andy Warhol and Velvet Underground and Nico and all of that stuff. I vaguely thought that they hooked up.
Yeah, no, definitely they hooked up. There's a great scene in the book where he's not a big guy, and someone remarks at how Nico like had her hand down his pants and was like leading him around like a pet around Max's Kansas City in New York. And then Iggy told me he remembered Nico sitting in the production booth while John Cale was doing the Stooges record, and her knitting, going, "Oh, very good," like in everything. Him doing her voice. When I like listen back to the call, it's hilarious because he does like the like the kind of Nico. That's something that's really funny, Tommy. When I was doing the book, is everybody did the Nico voice, this deep German accent. So like that in itself would be a hilarious like blooper tape, thing, because everybody's kind of their version of Nico. That was really fun.
Yeah. That's pretty funny. Yeah, I know people do that all the time when they talk about Mitzi Shore in the Comedy Store. They always do her voice. You're not funny, you know.
Yeah, I love it. You know what's hilarious? I don't know if this ever happens to you, but when you're interviewing someone like Iggy Pop, like, do you call him Iggy? Like, do you ask, what do I call you? So, like, I'm very aware now. So I just called him Mr. Pop the entire interview. So I'm going back to this. I don't know what's more uncomfortable, me calling him Mr. Pop, or I don't know. Like, it's hilarious going back and listening to it. Because I'm like, okay, Mr. Pop. It's hilarious.
Yeah, fucking, I love those Stooges albums. They are so brilliant. I love them.
Do you know what? When I was listening to my Will Sargent interview today, he was saying that now it's probably like a year old, but there was a newish Stooges release with John Cale remixes, like newer John Cale remixes. I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
No, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, they're coming out with remixes of everything these days.
Oh, are they not? That is not the truth.
I know so many albums they're getting reissued, remastered, remixed, everything. You know, it's crazy. You find out that so many songs were left off of the album originally. You know.
No, it's totally true. I was talking to Johnny Marr for an interview, and he told me, I mean, I'm dying at this idea. He said that he has a huge cache of songs like Prince, just like in his vault, which I would die, because like Johnny Marr's like my favorite guitarist of all time. I would die to get in that vault.
Yeah.
So, but I'm still mourning Prince. So there you go. Like, I'm still sad about Prince.
Oh my God! So I was so happy when his estate finally put up that YouTube channel and put all his music videos on there. Because he sued YouTube many years ago. But I was happy to find all those music videos that were never released that Kevin Smith made reference to in his Q&A show years ago, and I even got to see the video and hear his version of Manic Monday.
Oh, okay. I'll definitely have to check that out.
Yeah,
I'll definitely have to check that out.
I'm not going to spoil it for you. You got to go listen. It's, I mean, you'll be reminded of the Bengals version, but his version is so unique.
I'm sure, by the way, you've seen the Chappelle Show thing about Prince.
No.
Shut up.
What happened?
Just when you get off this call, Google Chappelle Show Prince basketball.
Uh, I probably did see it, and and I'm not even remembering because I used to watch the Chappelle show.
Do you like? Yeah, do you like Chappelle or like old Chappelle?
Yeah.
He basically it's Charlie Murphy, and Charlie Murphy goes over to Prince's house. And they play basketball,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like Eddie Murphy, Charlie Murphy versus Prince in the Time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not making it sound very funny, but it's like absolutely fucking hilarious because like this is way before Prince dies. So like this, they look very. He's just like there's all these guys and like cut off tops and fluffy hair. And they're like woohoo, you know what I mean? I'm not making it sound funny. You have to watch it. It's absolutely hilarious. That's all I'm gonna say. Just you have to watch it.
I'll take a
But
look.
it's just
Yeah.
I just feel like with Prince, it's just maybe since I'm old, but I feel like with Prince and Susanna and these different people we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they're after this kind of maybe there's a handful of people from like my age group, even dipping down to your age. I don't know if there's just really going to be like rock stars like there were before, like these kind of iconic people. There just isn't. Like I try to think of like who would the modern version be, and I'm trying to be very open minded. I'm like Beyonce, maybe like Taylor Swift. I mean, I don't like their music per se, but like Taylor Swift, like who do the kids like? Like Ed Sheeran. These aren't people that speak to me, but you know they're not really meant to.
Mm-hmm.
But I just feel like look at the variety of people I grew up with. Like the fact that like the Bangles and Prince are so different musically in a lot of ways, but they could come together and appreciate each other and make music together is incredible. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What do you think that there's? Am I just being an old fart? You can tell me I am.
No, I totally agree. And it's funny. People bitch and complain about concert ticket prices and meet and greet packages and all that. That's their living now. Unfortunately, because there's no more record sales.
Exactly. That's the only way they make money. It's so true. I mean, a record is really, it's like, why even put out a record? A record is really just a promotional piece, which is so depressing.
Yeah, fuck, I don't get it, and it's sad, but I mean, everyone's careers, they're living through the road, and a lot of them they love to play, so it doesn't seem like they have any problem doing that.
No, I'm totally there with you. I'm totally there with you. So, what would be your three records that you would say you cannot live without? Then, would Velvet Underground be in that mix?
Velvet Underground would definitely be in the top 10, but like three records that I just absolutely love are the Doors' first album, Van Halen's first album, and I love all the Beatles albums, but if I have to choose one, it's probably God, which one is good? Probably Rubber Soul.
Yeah, that'd probably be my favorite Beatles too.
Yeah,
Interesting. Rocker. Okay, interesting.
yeah.
Love it.
So I was curious. Did you talk to Nico's son?
I did talk to Nico's son.
Mm-hmm. Was he
He what?
was he cooperative and everything was good overall with him?
He is, yeah, he's very sweet. He is, I'm not sure exactly where he is now. One of the times I spoke with him, he was in a medical facility of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny because he spoke to me because he's also a Joy Division fan.
Mm-hmm.
So that was how I got through to him. He's hit up a lot about Joy Division.
Yeah. Did he like the book? Was he pleased with the book? Jennifer, hello? Hello? Did I lose you? You there? Hello? Let me recall her. Hello?
You can just say I'm boring. You don't have to hang up on me anymore.
Was he pleased with how the book came out?
I think you know what I think he was. I think he was at first he was worried because I think so many people hit him up for stuff, but
Yeah,
he was. I believe he was pleasantly surprised with how the book turned out. I've not heard anything. I've not heard anything to the contrary.
that's good. That's good. So tell me about this Britney book.
So the Britney book, I'd finished Nico. I was just doing the edits on Nico, and I was like, okay. One of the things that was fascinating about Nico is there were just so many. There's so much mythology and untruths around Nico, and I'm like, who I really enjoyed, even though it like made me gain about 20 pounds and stress eating and drinking. I really did enjoy the kind of the mystery of it all and figuring out what was really going on. And I'm like, who else can I do that with? And I could not believe. I'm like, who's someone we feel like we really really know, but do we actually know them? And I could not believe there was not like a thoughtful scholarly book done on Britney Spears, and that's how the Britney book really started. And then I mean, I kind of heard about Free Britney, but not really. So it wasn't until I'd already started on the book that all the Free Britney stuff really started kicking off. People thought like I'd planned it all, but I hadn't. And the way I did that is it's not really about Britney. It's about Britney as a cultural touchstone and how these different kind of parts of her life really reflects American culture and how American culture kind of infiltrates the rest of the world. So, especially with what's happening now in America, I think it's an important book to look at, not just as a woman and women's rights, but just capitalism, material culture, all those sorts of things that we've kind of touched on a bit throughout our chat today. That Britney book has a lot of those nuances in it. It's about a lot more than just Britney Spears.
I think this is going down in history as one of the strangest things that's ever happened to a pop star in the history of the world.
I totally agree with that. I mean, one thing I'm a little bit disappointed is when she first came out of the conservatorship, she said, I'm going to totally like work for other people that are also suffering. And I'm like, okay, let's see if you actually do that. And she hasn't, which I'm not surprised. It's a weird one because I think in one way, like you have people saying, when I say people, like I get asked this a lot, like, you know, what's really going on with Britney? And I'm like, we never have known Britney. And I think the closest we as like the general public have ever gotten to knowing Britney is the show Chaotic that she did when she was first with Kevin Federline. Mm-hmm. And she got slammed for doing that. And her Instagram. Like those are the kind of the two closest things we've ever gotten to know the true Britney. I don't think Britney really knows who she is, to be fair. Yeah. She's been in the limelight since she was a little kid. And, you know, like you and I were talking about earlier, I think it's very difficult to be a celebrity and have fame and all those things in general. But I don't know if she's ever gotten to figure out who Britney Spears is, the Britney Spears in lowercase letters, away from Britney Spears, the celebrity, or if it's all the same thing.
Yeah,
and that would be difficult.
Yeah, I'll tell you. You know, I've interviewed child actors, and they are so fucked up. They you know, I think they know who they are now, but I don't think they want to know who they are because they were, you know, playing that game for so long, you know. But there's a couple that I'm good friends with that they knew exactly who they are, and you know they can turn on, turn off, you know, whatever they do acting wise, and all of that stuff though. But the ones who like had substance abuse problems, it's fucked up. It really is.
I mean, I think it's interesting because I think as an American, the things that we're taught, I'm making a wide brushstroke. My experience has been the things I was taught, I should say, not necessarily by my parents or my family, but I was like, okay, making money, being successful equals making money and being famous. Those are kind of the two most important things. And I don't think anything, but then on the flip side of that, it's like, are those really the most important things? Like, really not. Like, to be the best person is to, I think, have friends and family and be happy. And I don't know if that goes with being rich and famous per se. I think there's the notorious B.I.G. had it right in a lot of ways. More money, more problems. So they can complicate things. It can make life easier, but can also complicate things in a lot of ways. And when you have money and fame, and you're not really taught or guided as to what to do with it, I think it can become very problematic and challenging.
Yeah, money is evil. Evil.
Yeah, you see, we were just watching the R. Kelly thing
Oh
the other
yeah.
night. My husband and I were, and that's again an artist I worked with, and I'm like watching it, going, it's just a rough one, because a lot of these artists, people just don't say no to, because you as someone that works with them, your income is reliant on that artist in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to say no to them. So in a lot of ways, that artist and anyone that they're impacting, you not interfering, it messes a lot of more people up, if that makes any sense. But then if you interfere, then you could yourself over. So it's this double-edged sword kind of situation.
Right. So, who would you personally like to write a book about next? I mean, I know your agent told you not to write the Beverly Hills 90210 book, but like, who would you personally like to write one about?
If I could do anything in the world and like money was not based on money at all,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to tell you. I'll tell you, but not recording.
Okay.
How about that? I'll tell you, but not recording. But I'll say one that I'd love to do for the podcast. I'll say one that you use for the podcast. Is that okay?
Okay, go ahead.
This will never. No one will ever pick this one up. But I really would like. One of my friends and I, we are obsessed with Waylon Flowers, and you're like, what? Who's Waylon Flowers? Waylon Flowers became famous because he was a puppeteer, and he had this puppet named Madam.
Mm-hmm.
And Madam had her own. Are you familiar with this? You're probably a little too young for Madam.
I know who Waylon Flowers is because Waylon Smithers on The Simpsons' name was kind of based on him.
Yes. Okay, so
Yeah.
Waylon Flowers. Just try to get with this idea. Waylon Flowers became famous for being a puppeteer. Now, first of all, unless it's on Sesame Street, like that's just an insane, like acid-induced weirdness. But the puppet that he had was called Madam, and she had her own TV show called Madam's Place.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still with me?
Yeah, I know Madam's Place.
And on this show, guess who was on the show? Corey Feldman.
Oh God, I have a Corey Feldman story, but I can't tell it on air.
Well, we'll have to have it. We'll have to have we will have to have an off-air conflab. So my friend and I become really obsessed with Waylon Flowers because he was this massive celebrity, like in the 70s, going into the early 80s, and then he was like the middle square on Hollywood Squares. He was just very, very present on kind of all this popular TV show. And then he became diagnosed with AIDS, and he was one of the first openly gay celebrities on TV. But as soon as he got diagnosed with AIDS, he was just like completely canceled. Like he just was cut from everything. And it's just I'm really interested, and I really want to write a lot more about this whole generation of people that have just been erased because they passed away from AIDS. Like my cousin died of AIDS, and it's interesting because I work at a university, and it seems like people that are growing up now don't seem to understand that there's a whole generation of people above me that were just really fought for their rights. But not only do they fight for their rights, they've just been forgotten and kind of not really been paid the homage that they deserve for what they went through. And the whole AIDS thing was terrifying. So yeah, I would love to write about Waylon Flowers and what a complete badass he was.
Mm-hmm. And then there's another one that you can't tell. That's fine.
Yeah, there's another one I can't tell. I'll tell you. We'll have a conflab. You'll tell me Corey Feldman, and I'll tell you I'll tell you the tea.
Awesome. Well, Jennifer, I want to thank you so much for finally coming on today and having this great talk.
I'm so sorry it took me so long. I've been a complete jerk, and you're an absolute legend for dealing with me.
I love how you use that word legend. I've never been called a legend in anything, so I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and I hope this Brittany book is going to be very successful for you.
Oh, thank you so much. It comes out in the U.S. on July 19th, so pick it up at any good bookstore.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, you have yourself a great day, and please stay safe over there. Or it's night over there. I'm sorry. Have a great night over there.
It is, but thank you so much.
Well, there you have it. Jennifer Otter Bickerdike. Ain't she a sweetheart? Wow, what a bundle of energy. I loved talking to her. And she's so congenial and friendly. I loved talking to her. And wow, oh, if she could get me a Bengal on here, I'd be the happiest fanboy in the whole wide world. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Well, until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying there's no shame in living in the past because the present sucks. Later, dudes.